I'm Zack Lynch. I'll be the moderator for this panel. I'm the founder and general partner of Jazz Venture Partners. We're an early stage venture firm focused on investing in human performance technology. We have a very special interest in technologies that are experiential in nature and that can accelerate learning at both educational institutions as well as in the enterprise. And so I'm absolutely delighted today to be speaking with these professionals here who are going to take us on a tour of what their companies are doing on the cutting edge of developing and designing these technologies to improve how we all can learn and train and grow over time. I did see that in the little app that's supposed to have all of our little bios that there are a couple of us missing, so I'm going to give them each a minute or two here at the very beginning to sort of describe who they are and what their company does, and then we'll dive into some wonderful questions. Jessica?
Hi everyone, I'm the Global Head of Education at Unity Technologies. If you're not aware of Unity, we're on your phones, on your iPads. We're on about 3 billion devices globally. We're an interactive, real-time 3D content platform. So whether you're creating interactive learning experiences, virtual reality, augmented reality, most developers are using us today to create those. My role at Unity means three actually very different things. The first is working with our entire customer base of millions of developers and enterprises globally, helping them understand how to implement Unity, starting as young as middle school all the way up to advanced professionals and creating that talent pipeline. It also means working with all of our educators and schools globally to provide STEAM and STEM-based curriculum. And then finally, it also means working closely with ed tech developers and helping them to understand how to use the analytics platform.
Dan?
Morning, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Dan Ayub. I'm the General Manager of Mixed Reality Education at Microsoft. Probably familiar with the company, but in terms of what that rolls up, that's, excuse me, everything from early education right up through enterprise where mixed reality goes. So everything from like 3D on 2D screens to the HoloLens to immersive devices that we just launched in the fall. So the work my group is doing kind of spans the spectrum of everything from early education all the way up through university and then all the way into vocational education and enterprise using all of these devices. So super excited to be here with the folks here today, and thanks everyone for coming.
Awesome. Hi, Derek BELCH. I'm the founder and CEO of Striver. For those of you who have not heard of us, we were founded about 3 years ago working primarily with NFL and college football teams, using virtual reality for additional mental repetitions, off-the-field training, performance improvement, et cetera. About 1.5 years ago, we started working with Walmart, which obviously put us on a much different path. We're still doing the sports work, very much a part of the core of what we do. But as of today, we work with over a dozen customers in the Fortune 500 using VR for training, performance improvement, better retention, engagement, et cetera, that we'll get to. Not an education company per se, but how do we fit here as it relates to improved learning, improved engagement, driving ROI with real tangible results, and how a lot of the components of why VR, AR, et cetera, are good education tools. We are actually doing it in the enterprise training space, which is a $50 billion market annually. We work with, I think, we've touched like over 200,000 employees at this point over the last 1.5 years. Walmart obviously knocks out a big chunk of that. So excited to share a lot of what we've seen and what we've learned and kind of the reality of virtual reality in the real world, which has been pretty mind-blowing.
Hi everyone, my name is Tina TRAN. I head up educational content at Oculus. So my focus squarely is on content. Oculus is a company that's known for our VR hardware and software. We run a consumer store where you can download VR apps just like you would download, say, your apps on your iPhone. And we have everything from games to entertainment. We have Hulu and Netflix on there that you can plug into and watch. And now we also are investing in educational content that's broadly appealing to both consumers, but also something that could be used in schools. Our focus on the education side is around things that are helpful for you to experience in real life. So empathy education, it's really hard to have empathy for things that you might not be able to experience in real life. So putting people into experiences that will create empathy. exploration, so what it's like to be an astronaut. If you're a child, you may have never thought about that, but then all of a sudden you find yourself looking over and seeing the Earth behind you, and it gives you a new perspective in terms of the world, but also in terms of what you're capable of doing. Maybe I can be an astronaut. And then we also look at lifelong learning, so things like language learning. We all know that when you pop yourself in a country, learning is all about being immersed, right? So if you can pop yourself into a headset and you're only speaking Spanish, would you learn it more quickly? So we're doing a lot around the education front in addition to what we're really known for, which is the consumer-facing games and entertainment.
Terrific. Maybe we start, because this is such a diverse audience and we all have different backgrounds, with a little primer on the technologies of augmented reality and virtual reality. Tina, maybe you can share a little bit more about sort of what this immersive technology actually is as a hardware system and software system.
Absolutely. So we have two main pieces of hardware. We have what is called the Oculus Rift, which most people might be familiar with. It started on Kickstarter, and it was the reason why Facebook acquired Oculus initially. It's a headset that allows you to also be tethered to a PC, so it's very high performing running graphics. And you have positional tracking, which is the main sort of difference. If I'm sitting here and I have the headset on and I do this, the table gets closer to me. Even though I have a headset on and it doesn't, you can't tell. And then if I turn my head to the right and there's a waterfall over there, I'll hear it differently as well. So it kind of tricks you into believing that you're there. And then we also have mobile VR, where you're not tethered, so you have more movement, but the graphics aren't quite as strong, and you lack positional tracking, and you lack hands. And those are the things that often make it feel more real. So you do sort of have to trade off convenience and I guess we're all coming out with the Oculus Go very soon, which is $200. So convenience and a lower price point for positional tracking and hands and some of the other business. But those are the two main areas that we play in from a hardware perspective, and then we have a store with all of the content that would make you want to buy the hardware.
I'll add a couple things
Sure.
on the VR side. So I guess quick show of hands, how many people have put on a VR headset before? Probably everybody at this point.
Nice.
Cool. So a year and a half ago, it was half the room, and earlier it was a third of the room, if that. So I will talk later about ROI, because that is the reason that businesses, schools, et cetera, are going to spend or not spend money. But just to add to what Tina said, as far as why does VR make sense for education, for learning, for engagement, performance enhancement, et cetera, we do get the question a lot, does it work? Why is it better than traditional two-dimensional content, than being lectured to, than PowerPoints, than videos? And my response typically is twofold. One, well, what's the ROI on your current training? How do you measure whether your current training is successful, your current education? Well, we don't know. We have tests, we have surveys, we have performance reviews 6 months down the road. So there actually isn't a baseline outside of traditional test taking for whether or not 2D training actually works. I'm focusing on training, obviously, and we'll talk about education. And then the second thing I say is, well, here's the deal, guys. The academic research, and as we know in this room, technology follows this arc of military to academia to the business world to the consumer. All of the academic research says this works. The things that Tina described, when you put on a headset and you are fully immersed in a new environment, whether it's an astronaut, whether it's standing on a Walmart store, whether it's standing on a football field, it says, all the academic research says it is orders of magnitude more effective on what's going on in your brain relative to traditional learning. Now, does it work for you? I don't know. We got to talk about that. We got to talk about where is your pain? Where are you spending too much time? Where are you spending too much money? We've been doing some really cool stuff, looking at 3-hour lectures for an insurance company and putting that into a 12-minute VR experience. And guess what? The retention is almost the same. And we've been doing A/B testing. So to back up what Tina said around just the hardware, software, experiential side, there's also the, well, does it work? Is it actually more effective side? And objectively, all of the academic research says yes, and now I'm excited to talk about some of the things we're doing where we're seeing it play out in real time to prove that it does work.
And there's another small component that's important, which is why is this important to me and how is it connected to the real world? So VR really helps with helping people understand that I'm studying this because this is where I would use it in the real world. And I'm not afraid to make mistakes in VR because there are no bad consequences, real bad consequences. But now I know what the consequences are. I'm not going to do that in real life.
Yep.
Right, so if VR is deeply immersive, Dan, can you share a little bit more about mixed reality and augmented reality and how that's sort of fundamentally different in ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, there are some similarities, right? I think as well to what you were saying. When we do work in immersive as well as in augmented reality, and yeah, when you look at the academic research, it's anywhere in the neighborhood. Like as you start to aggregate those studies, it's upwards of 22% improvement in learning outcomes, which is considerable. If you're trying to get any kind of training going, or even just in an educational standpoint. But you also get things like retention is way higher, as is engagement. And a lot of what the studies do, and they break that down from a neuroscience standpoint, using these devices in education or training is associated with reduced cognitive load, which is really, really important when it gets to retention and understanding. So effectively, these tools make it easier for people to understand these concepts that you're trying to put forth. So I just wanted to highlight that point. So when you get to the differences between immersive and augmented, I think probably the best way I've heard it put was virtual reality lets you, puts you in a different world. Augmented reality lets you see the world differently. So if you look at the HoloLens, which is our augmented reality device, it's a completely untethered basic computer on your head. It's got full Wi-Fi capabilities. You can move around, but you've still got complete spatial awareness. So if I were to have one of these devices on my head right now, I would still have full awareness of everybody here, and my interaction would be more around things like holograms or voices around you. So what that lends itself to very, very well is vocational training for one. It's actually augmented reality is showing really, really positive results for skills training in particular, where you're trying to teach physical repetitive movement. And also, it's great for cohorts, right? So because you're not cut off, you can have 3 or 4 people in the room or even more at the same time, potentially all of with these devices, seeing the same thing, working on things together, and it doesn't feel as closed off. So when you look at, there are things I think both are better at than the other, and I think that's the important thing to think about. I think there are things that virtual reality is better for, and there are things that augmented reality is better for, and I think it just depends on what scenario you're trying to engage.
And so Jessica, your company, Unity, doesn't have any hardware, but it's a major platform player across all of these hardware platforms. How are companies using your technology to help accelerate their educational efforts, their training efforts inside the enterprise, as well as at research institutions?
So we're very lucky, as you said, in that we get to work with all of you and build on these great ideas. In addition to that, we work with organizations like NASA, the Air Force, the Navy, Volkswagen, Accenture, incredibly huge organizations that are trying to scale their learning and training efforts. And where we're finding the earliest adoption right now, which you would expect, is in very high risk, very expensive learning scenarios, as well as, for example, trying to simulate a car before you spend the $6 billion to create the first blueprint of the car that you're making. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, we start very early in the learning experience. So our efforts are always to work with these incredible partners. Young people experience these interactive virtual reality, augmented reality experiences, and then want to figure out, how do I do this right away? So one of the areas that we're exploring from a learning perspective that we'll be launching in a couple of months is learning VR in VR, which seems obvious, a bit meta. But we think of that as a really powerful way for creators who have been inspired by their experiences to then move into creating the next learning and training opportunities.
So learning and training in VR, for VR, that's one example. I would love to dive into some more examples at a very concrete level of how your technologies are being used to improve learning, improve retention. I know, Derek, you're sort of on the forefront here. I'd love to hear some more from you.
Yeah, without breaking confidentiality on a few things, there are some things that I'm allowed to talk about. First of all, I think this is actually a very misunderstood landscape right now, because I'll say something controversial that this panel may not want to hear, or people in the room. The technology is secondary, maybe even tertiary. If you can't get over the innovation hump and the change hump of putting something on your face, or integrating VR into the classroom, or integrating VR into your training routine, very much the battle that we fought for the first 2 years in sports, where you've got guys that lift and run and stretch and watch film, and they don't have 10 more minutes to do anything else, so they think. So getting over that hump of integrating it into their routine That's challenge number one. And all of the cool things that are happening up here, hardware, software, et cetera, they don't matter if you can't get over that usage hump. And I don't say that to be negative, I say that to be realistic. All right, so now let's assume we've gotten over the usage hump. What are some of the things we're seeing? Walmart has gone public with some data, which has been pretty cool. We put associates side by side, who used VR as part of their training and who didn't, and how they do on their exams. 70% of the students that use VR did better than everybody else. That's a big number. We're working with Fidelity, and they just announced in the press a month ago, they saw a 10% improvement in their customer service scores as a result of the people that were using VR for training around empathy for the customer, how to be more effective in a call center, et cetera. Unfortunately, I don't know what the ROI is on that 10%, because I would use it in a contract negotiation if I did. But those of you in the room that are in that business, you know that a 10% bump in anything is massive, likely millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions. And then we're working with a large auto manufacturer that will be public at some point. And again, put side by side, how do students do on associates do on traditional e-learning exams? So, all right, you just went through your PowerPoints, your videos, you took a test. How'd you do? On average, 9 out of 10. Okay, good, you know your stuff. Put them through a virtual simulation before they have to go on the floor to do their job. On average, 5 out of 10. That's a major gap. And that tells us that people know what to do, but when you say, here, go do it, without having to physically be there and stop the line if you make a mistake that leads to tens of millions of dollars lost over in the aggregate, they don't know what to do. So how do you rep it, and how do you train it, and how do you put them through it again and again and again until they know what to do without having them have to make mistakes in real time? That's just a handful of things. Last one, airplane company, going there tomorrow. I can't say who it is. They have to rent an airplane once every 6 months to get their technical operations crew access to the airplane. Or they have to go into the hangar at 3 in the morning to get their 30 minutes to look around and train before they have to roll the airplane out. And if you start messing with an engine on an airplane for training, it could crash. That's bad, right? So now they have access to the plane 365 days a year, mentally. So those are just a handful of things, fuzzy as well as some hard ROI that we're seeing. And this is the real deal. And now how do these companies that we're working with daily that are powering these experiences, how do we continue to make it better and make it super actionable going forward?
Right, it's fantastic that you guys are actually getting these ROI statistics embedded in your examples with these companies.
Yep.
Tina, I know Oculus has the Oculus Store. You're out there talking to the developers, developing all this content. Can you share with us some of the examples that you're looking at right now and where you think this can actually go in the future?
So for the educational setting, there can be a lot of uses that can be very powerful. We have started by donating VR headsets to libraries and also to schools that are 60% or more with their students in the free or reduced lunch program. So something we care about is providing equal access to opportunity, and that's actually one of my core values. I came to the US as a refugee at the age of 4, and for us, education was everything in terms of being able to make a life for yourself. So we're focused on these communities particularly because there's a lack of opportunity, or perhaps a lack of opportunity to see things or do things that other folks might be able to do. And one of those things that we've created that could be used in schools and is being used it's called Masterworks. I think we're showing it here on the show floor, and Journeys Through History. So you study about history and you know that Mount Rushmore exists, but how cool would it be to get into VR and learn about Mount Rushmore, when it was created, who created it, while you're sitting underneath Abraham Lincoln's nose and you're looking up at it. So, in the school setting, it's not just, it allows you to go further than just learning about things, but experiencing it yourself so that you don't forget about it, but you understand. And there's that Confucius saying that's, I see and I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And so it's about learning and transforming the way we learn. There is an incredible German publisher working out of Germany that created a VR experience to get students excited about biology and what's happening in their body. So rather than doing something like going into your brain cells, they did something which was very approachable, which is what happens to food when you swallow it? we all swallow food and we're all curious what does happen to it. So it's, so it's not just like VR on its own, but it's VR and how you want to apply it and make it very relatable to real life experiences and how you connect it back to the real world. So in the school setting, we work with incredible teachers like Monica, who's now at Facebook Education. She's been a teacher for 10 years previously, and we really try to understand, like, how do students learn best? Is it because they're curious? Does it allow them to explore? And that's kind of what VR allows them to do. They're not just passive learners. They're getting to go in and explore what is happening in the world, what is happening in their bodies. And so for me, I'm very focused on content, because VR itself is just a piece of technology, but how you apply it and how it feels real and how people are using it to either get excited about learning or learn more effectively, that's really key.
And you're very excited about the launch of the Oculus Go, which is the mobile headset coming out for $200 in the coming months.
Yeah, and that's going to be a game changer, because you don't have to like slap a phone in. So it just becomes a lot more manageable in terms of quality. The quality is going to go up a ton. It's going to weigh less. It's going to be easy, so you don't have to manage a separate phone, and it'll be much more classroom friendly. So yeah.
That's
and
great.
Small plug for them, it's really good.
Thank
I
you,
don't think
Derek.
I'm allowed to tell anybody that, so don't tweet that we have one right now, but we've been helping them test some things. We're testing it with some customers. It is a really, really good device. A lot of kinks to work out still, and that's fine, but it's phenomenal.
Terrific.
What's your hashtag for my tweet later?
I'm not on it.
Striver.
Can't even
Well
attribute it to me. Yeah.
Dan, tell us how mixed reality is being used these days.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to reinforce some of the things I think you guys were saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's all about the scenario, right? I mean, we're seeing it particularly in educational scenarios. If the teacher in particular can't get in there and use this technology in a quick, easy way, it's kind of pointless, right? You could have all the greatness in the galaxy waiting on the other side, and it's not going to matter if you can't get people over that hump. So just, again, to kind of hit that point home a little bit more. Yeah, I think one of the advantages to this kind of tool is it falls right into classical educational theory. If people are familiar with the Edgar Dale cone of learning a little bit, right? It kind of goes from that retention from 10% all the way down to 90%, from kind of classical-based lecture all the way to learning by experience. And that's where I think the power of VR and MR and AR really is it actually lets people reinforce what they've already learned. So we're seeing some amazing things. I'll focus on HoloLens since we talked about VR a little bit. HoloLens is skewing pretty much towards, at the moment, towards university and enterprise for a number of different reasons. One of the great things about the HoloLens that people may not know is it's got a forward-facing camera. So that's fantastic for a lot of remote training scenarios. So, you talked about like using planes. You can actually save people getting on planes and moving them around for training in a number of cases, because you can have someone, so say I'm a trainee, I'm physically doing something. You can have an expert on a laptop 1,000 miles away actually seeing what I see and marking up my field of view in real time and actually correcting things that I'm doing. So, the power for that, in addition to just being able to have multiple people in there at the same time, is fantastic, because now you've got this remote expert ability for someone who's not even there with you to help you on in your training. Another one, I guess, an example from a university standpoint, we're seeing a lot of pickup in universities, particularly in medical, for teaching anatomy, not only teaching anatomy, but also for conducting operations in real time. There was an example in Europe, I think we talked about it just a couple of months ago, where doctors were using this in real time in surgery. So they would actually have the HoloLens on and they could see the patient's real-time information without having to look away. And Case Western here in the United States is a great example of a university that's adopted the HoloLens in a really powerful way and is using this to teach their anatomy classes, to prepare people to actually work on an actual cadaver, right? So great example of cost savings. Cadavers are quite expensive, as I've learned, to use and maintain, and there's some terrible stories I've heard in the course of this. But for a lot of reasons, you don't necessarily want to throw students right at a cadaver for those exact reasons, so they tend to wait a little bit until they can have access to it. Well, now through the HoloLens, they can actually prepare students for the time that they're going to get in there, and it's not necessarily replacing the tactile nature of actually working with a body, but you can prepare people many years in advance for what that's going to be like.
So we sit here in 2018. If you go back 3 years and you listen to sort of the hype cycle of where augmented reality and virtual reality were supposed to be by now, we would all be wearing headsets and glasses for a variety of different reasons in our lives, and yet here we are. We've got a couple of really cool examples. It's at Walmart, it's at Case Western, a couple of other companies. We're seeing it in some classroom examples, but it really hasn't hit the mainstream yet. So I'd like to kind of focus on that for a little bit and discuss with you guys, what's holding this back? Is it price, performance? Is it culture? Is it, what's going on here? Is it just sort of natural technology adoption life cycle issues? And maybe Jessica, you can start out since you're sort of on the leading edge of working with all these different companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above of what you mentioned. The price point is challenging. I was just on the phone earlier with the head of post-secondary at a major publisher who was like, I can't do VR, I've got to do AR because we can't expect every kid in college in America to pay for one of these. I think the biggest thing we haven't discussed yet that Derek is actually a great example of overcoming is it's really hard to design. To have that real world immersive experience is not easy. We are totally focused right now as a company on getting designers and developers anywhere in the world and giving them the easiest talent pipeline as fast as possible to get to a point where they can create the quality of what you've created. But it's just, I think it's also a talent challenge as well.
So I just wanted to clarify one quick thing, because Oculus Go is coming out with a $200 VR headset, and yet HoloLens is like $3,000, and you were saying that AR is easier for people to adopt?
Yeah,
Are you thinking sort of AR, like mobile AR?
Exactly, just mobile
Got it.
AR. Yeah.
Okay,
it's just
great.
ubiquitous, everyone has a phone.
Yep.
When you're talking about equal access, which we've been talking about in K-12 forever with computers, it's the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, I'd reinforce that wholeheartedly. I think there's no one thing which I think is challenging. I think content is a big problem as well. And I would actually add to that good content, because I think bad content is worse than no content. And I think we all know, probably a number of people in this room, so here, how many people have had a bad VR or AR experience where you felt nauseous or, right? So, and every time, and you've probably told a bunch of your friends and colleagues about it, right? So, I mean, I think like poor quality content is actually worse than no content because we've got to win people back to the fold. And then, yeah, the ability for people to make their own in reasonable ways. I mean, Tina and I were talking before how a number of the developers we work with, particularly on the VR side, because we do a lot of VR work as well, are former game developers. Because game developers have this kind of background, they're familiar with Unity, and they're familiar with the engines and making these things happen. A lot of the times I find myself talking about web development back in the day, right? Like as a parallel, like if you can remember, you used to need a bunch of engineers and some designers and things like that to make a good website. And now that's, pretty much anyone can jump in there and do a decent one. I would love to see us get to a world where it's that simple for anybody. Like when we're dealing with teachers, which we generally do more on the VR side than the AR side, there's just this obvious delta between what's in their brain and getting it to the students, because it's just not easy for them right now to make that content. So yeah, I would agree 100%. And then you could get to things like cost and battery life and things like that.
So this is my favorite question.
You were excited.
I could literally talk for an hour about this topic.
Can I do your intro? It's all about ROI.
We'll get there. Okay, so I'll try to list a few things quickly. Number one, education. So, and what I mean by that is lack thereof. So the media, sorry if anyone's in the room right now from the media, literally is wrong with 90% of what they write. They're excited about telling a story about the future and what's possible versus what actually exists. So they're seeding the minds of everyone on this panel and everyone out there that AR is those Minority Report style glasses today, or it's going to be there around the corner. That's a really freaking hard problem to solve. And no disrespect to HoloLens, but it's getting there incrementally. It's going to be at least 5 years, if ever, before we see super sleek, computer-driven, I can walk anywhere, look anywhere, totally seamless AR. That may be 20 years away, and that's okay. But we walk into demos with companies that have read the news or looked at, no disrespect, the hype HoloLens video that has Marshawn Lynch running through a wall, or this amazing experience with the car lighting up in all these ways, and it's doctored to get people excited about it. It's not what it really is today, and that's fine. Same with VR. So number one, the education and the reality of where all this technology is just not there, and that creates misconceptions for people. Number two, it's all about implementation. So when you're meeting with Procter & Gamble and they've got over 100,000 employees, They don't want to do anything unless it can touch all 100,000 employees. Well, we're not at the point where this is on a cell phone and you can just beam it out. We're not at the point where it's $20 to just buy one for everybody. Google Cardboard is a 4-letter word. That is not VR. So someone just asked us the other day, can we buy 50,000 Google Cardboards and send them out to everybody? Well, even that will cost you $500,000, and it's just not a good experience. It's a gateway drug for what VR is, right? So I mean, that's just the reality, and that's fine. But people think that, oh yeah, I can scale this to all my employees with Google Cardboard. Well, you might as well just put a video on the screen. Like, it's going to make people nauseous. The ROI isn't there. It's not what immersive technology is supposed to be. So total misconceptions out there as far as what we actually have to take months to re-educate them as far as what this stuff is and isn't. And then the last thing I'll add, on a laundry list of things I could say, is price, is cost, as it relates to implementation. So how do you touch 250,000 Walmart employees that go through training over the course of the year in their academy system? You don't today, and that's fine. Like, give it some time. VR, AR is going to be everywhere by 2020. No, it's not. Like, let's just be realistic about it, and that's fine. Let's figure out how we can make the technology work given where it is today. So what did we do with Walmart? We said, okay, you've got 200 learning academies around the country. Let's put one Oculus Rift in every single one of them, and let's integrate it into the curriculum so you teach it this, and this way for 1 hour out of every day of your 2-week training cohort. Some people use it, some people look at it on the screen, they use it as a discussion tool. It is integrated culturally into what they do. As deep-pocketed as Walmart is, they do not want to spend the money to buy 30 headsets for every Walmart Academy. That would be $50 million in VR hardware alone. They're printing money at Walmart. They're not going to do that. So, and they're the top of the food chain with respect to money. So when the Go comes out and it's better, as we see the technology continue to get more ubiquitous in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, that's when you're going to see the scale. When the computing power is such that you can take an existing computer that's on everyone's desk or their laptop and you can plug the headset in, that's when we will see the scale. That's when this is really going to go. So,
Tina, you want to pile on?
Yeah.
I have a couple of comments around that.
Great.
So
By the way, I'm optimistic.
I hear you.
So I think what's missing also is the killer app, right? So once there's the killer app and you understand why it's important to your life, what value it brings to your life, whether it's at home, at school, or in training, that's really kind of where we'll find that VR is successful. And the killer app isn't something we just like do once a month. And that's the problem with VR now is I think people pop in and they're like, wow, this is really cool. And then it just sits on the shelf. So there needs to be something that builds retention, that has retention in it where you come back again and again and you're finding enough value. One area that we found which has been pretty strong in terms of retention outside of games, because they have their own positive retention, they don't have an issue with retention, but is meditation. And breathing and mindfulness. So this is something that can be used in schools to get students that are centered and forget about what happened at home or the night before and to get them ready to learn. Same with if you're in a high-stress work environment. If you imagine being at a call center and having everybody yell at you, imagine like being able to go in and calm down and breathe, even do that between breaks. That could really help you do your job better. So there are interesting ways that you can apply VR for not just training and education, but for like helping you sort of be more mindful and be more present and helping you be in a more relaxed state to do whatever it is you need to do more effectively. In schools, that might be before you take a test, right? Because you might be nervous about the test. So I'd say like the killer app is missing. And then another piece that I think Danny has touched on a little bit is community, right? So if you are, if you're going to be rolling out to a school or rolling out to a corporation, who are the leaders in the school, in the corporation, and how do they get folks that are using VR and finding it very helpful to talk to one another and to say to everyone, this is what I'm finding, these are the results I'm getting, and that's how you build community, and that's also how you build habits, is when somebody else is saying, I found this very powerful, well heck, I'm gonna go and try it too. So we have, we're lucky, we're owned by Facebook, and we have things like Facebook groups, and there's a product called Workplace that a lot of companies have, including Walmart, right? I can say that out loud. And that's a great opportunity to have folks who are using VR to be able to talk about what they're using it for, how they would change a certain training session to be more effective, et cetera, so that you don't feel alone, because it can be something that can be very overwhelming. And content, again, I just keep going back to content. We had this problem in the store when we first launched our store where we knew that often your first experience with VR would be in an Oculus store and putting the Rift on. And we felt a great responsibility. So we turned away a ton of apps that developers were submitting because they made us sick, and we didn't want. So the problem is, if it's your first VR experience, you don't say that was a bad experience. You say VR sucks, and VR is bad, right? So you just take that and you broadly apply it to a whole industry, and we felt a great responsibility for that. So we were we had very high standards in terms of what we put into the store. But then we heard from developers, and they were like, we worked a year on this, and you're not letting us publish it in your store. Like, you're evil, right? So there's a balance. So now we have other indicators of whether something is comfortable for all, or comfortable for some, or if it's intense, meaning get ready for that terrible roller coaster ride or whatever, right? But everybody has a different sense of what they want in an experience. But we do have to balance it with people walking away and saying, I'm never doing that again, because they got sick for an hour or for however long, right. Versus letting people know that this is just a bad experience, and let me put you in something that's nice. And I often ask people before I put them to experience, like, do you play a lot of video games? What's your experience in VR? And that will help me identify what's the best thing to put them into.
One more quick thing to add that I think is super important. Another reason for the slow adoption as it relates to education, enterprise, et cetera, candidly, a lot of the decision makers that are looking for the ROI to justify spending money are older. They are not tech enthusiasts. They are technophobic. And I just read a stat the other day that over the next decade, in manufacturing and education and a lot of industries where baby boomers are, at the top of the food chain and are the most experienced, they're gone. They are, over the next decade, they are disappearing, and we're going to be almost 45% millennials in a lot of these jobs and in the American workforce at large over the next 5-10 years. Okay, well, that generation wants this technology. Mm-hmm. The generation leaving doesn't want it. Mm-hmm. They don't want to spend money on it. They don't want to use it. They don't get it. And I'm not saying that disrespectfully or ageism. I've seen it. I've seen people say, not for me. I've been doing this for 40 years my way. So that out with the old, in with the new, we tell companies all the time, don't wait till 2022 to start to do this, because then you're 3 years away from learning how to use it. Make your mistakes now while the tech is still kind of finding its way to a certain extent, but it's good enough. And then when your new workforce comes in, that knowledge transfer will have already existed, and you're going to be ready to go. So.
And sorry, one more thing I want to throw in before I move on, and I don't think this is what you're alluding to with your comment about plugging it in when it pops. I think untethered is the other thing, right? I think that's a big barrier to people grabbing it. They feel weird, they're worried they're going to trip on their wires and things like that. And I think you're referring to equivalent computational power with that statement. Yes. But I just think like that is another big point that we just need to get to.
So let's take that point to the next level. You have a magic wand. You could solve any problem with this technology right now. What would it be?
The problem to solve, like the world problem to solve?
No, the technology. What's wrong with the technology that would enable it to be adopted more effectively within universities, enterprises, and people's daily lives?
Great question.
Price.
What's it got to be?
I mean, I think it has to be...
$99?
Yeah, exactly. 100.
$100.
Yeah.
Well, I think price is a big one, but I'll go somewhere else since you said that one already. I think easy content creation is another one, that anybody can just do this and make fantastic stuff, especially for like secondary education, things like that you're not reliant on multi-$100,000 software development to make it happen.
Price. And actually price is 20-fold. How much does the hardware actually cost? How much does the development cost? What's the time what's the time I have to put in to learn it? What's the cost to me of change? Cost is a multifaceted thing, but that's probably the biggest one.
I'd say price and content, just because I think it's important, again, to really identify why, even if it is $100, why would I get it? And it's not a novelty item and it just sits in my closet. So it's a combination of those both for me. Yeah.
And as you guys look forward, we've been talking about sort of the here and now. Where are we going in the next 5 years? How is your magic wand going to be at least partially effective? Do you see your organizations move, like Dan, for instance? I mean, we know that there's a sort of a HoloLens Project 2 out there. you might not be on that project or privy to where it's headed, but what could that be?
I'll take that in a different direction. I mean, where I get really excited about the future, and this may not be 5 years, this may be farther down the line.
Yep.
I say all the time where for me the magic of this like virtual reality, augmented reality really pops is when you layer artificial intelligence and machine learning into the experiences as well. From a learning standpoint, right? There's a lot of talk in education about personalized learning. And again, I'm not going to say this is 5 years down the line. I think this is very far down the line. But when you get to the point where you've got really compelling, smart, powerful AI that is able to customize your experience to you in general, but in these devices as well, I think that's when you're really going to see some crazy magic happen.
And really that technology is actually being developed today just for the mobile and client server systems that are actually still out there, right? And so porting that into the AR, VR experience.
In a specific way, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I would add predictability to that.
Yep,
So I
agreed.
kind of said what I was going to say around data and analytics, and we're actually starting to do some of this stuff. And predictability, so if you can put somebody in a job interview, or you can put them in, at the last thing they have to do in their training cohort before they go onto the factory floor or before they take a test or whatever, and you can predict with, I don't know, 30, 40, 50, maybe 80% certainty, and they can get some number tells you how ready they are to do that job, or the likelihood that they're going to fail, or they need more training, or they need more teaching. That's worth something. And that is what will change this. It's not just going in for fun. There's a point. And we're actually very close to some really cool things, just because we have a lot of real data, not fake data internally. It's like real people using it and paying for it. So that, to me, that's the really cool thing that could happen in the next 5 years.
Right. And Tina, from a content perspective, how big do you expect this world to develop into?
I think we're right now very actually focused on social experiences in VR. That's something we haven't really talked about today. But of course, you'd have to have enough people that have the VR headset so that you'd be able to do it with your friends and your family. Whether that's the power of social learning, so that I find that when I'm explaining something to someone, I'm learning it better myself. And so if you're going into an experience and you get to hear your classmates, their thoughts and like, wow, if only I could do this. It just kind of opens up the imagination in terms of what you can do together. Same with training. You learn a lot from the mistakes the people around you are making, right? So VR doesn't have to be an isolating experience. In fact, it can be much more powerful when you're experiencing things with others. Simple things like watching, surprisingly, Netflix. We're sitting in a theater and y'all are watching the same content, but you look over to your friend and you can hear each other responding to what's happening on the screen, whether you're both laughing or giggling. I think that will be really powerful, and that will also help with the adoption. And first you have to have a lot of adoption, but then once that happens, you'll have even more adoption as people want to do it in social settings.
And I'll just add to your biggest challenge, where Unity is incredibly focused right now on making sure that content creation continues to be an easy onboarding, but that as we mature into higher end development, that we have those support materials, whether it's really immersive multi-week-long boot camps to be able to create the high-end developers. The other area that is really concerning to me personally and to Unity right now is that over 95% of the content is created by white men. And so how do we get a more diverse base of storytellers and creators to create the immersive experiences that we all want to partake in the future?
Can we talk a little bit more about that? Because that's a really interesting point that rarely gets discussed and needs to be sort of brought out into the open, because many of these ways of looking at knowledge and experiencing what is being developed in AR and VR is from a particular perspective. Yeah.
I can certainly speak to that.
Yeah.
So I'll just give you one anecdotal example. I was really fortunate to manage a $10 million fund that Mark Zuckerberg announced a couple years ago around how we will be investing more in education. So I've been working very closely identifying VR developers and content partners we want to work with to create content for the store. And one developer came to me and she said, I'd really like to see us build this experience where you can see the scientific breakthroughs of these 3 incredible men. And it was last year, it was the year of Hidden Figures. And I said, that's really interesting. What if we instead focused on the accomplishments of 3 incredible women in science? So we decided then to focus on Grace Hopper, Marie Curie, and Jane Goodall. So it does really matter, like who is doing it and who's creating it, even though it was a woman that was pitching it to me, right? And at the end of the day, that's what we're building. We have programs at Oculus like Launchpad where we have folks fill out an application and tell us about their background and tell us what about them is diverse and what about them is different and unique. And so we're using that as one program to help create more diverse creators of content. We have programs with universities. There's a program called NextGen where we're investing in VR classes, how to become a content creator at the university level so that we are seeding our next sort of generation of content creators. So it is something important to us, and we do need to have more decision makers that are diverse, that are making the decisions, so that it's something that we care about. And it has to be part of the company culture, otherwise people won't have enough time or mind space to even think about it. And I'm really glad you brought it up, Jessica.
Sorry, the one thing I would add to that too, that I know I get when we were talking about this before, I get really concerned about is just socioeconomic equity around these devices. Like if these devices are as powerful as they're showing for education, how do we make sure everybody has access to them and it's not just, again, this is where I get really passionate about the price point for that as well, right? Like how does this just not become yet another thing that increases the divide and we make sure there's equal access to it from an educational standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, being a venture investor and getting to see a lot of these young companies, you know, looking for their seed funding or their Series A funding, we do see some very novel uses of this technology to improve empathy in individuals. There are opportunities here for sexual harassment training, where I know Derek, you know, there's some interesting research that's been done at Stanford and Jeremy Bailenson lab that shows that, you know, if you put a man inside a room in a woman's body in virtual reality and you're sitting around a large table, you get to experience that in a way that you would never have thought of what that feeling would be like before. And there's some real opportunities there. There are some real business opportunities for entrepreneurs who are looking to sort of take this to the next level. Yes, Derek?
Well, agree with everything you said.
Yep.
But it has to be actionable.
Absolutely.
It can't be, oh yeah, I did it, and it was cool, or it was interesting, or it was different, and then I walk away, and I forget about it. Like, it has to be reinforced. So again, back to what I said 45 minutes ago, like the tech, what makes it, doesn't matter. Like, some of the tech will influence that. It will influence how we make people want to come back. It will influence the data we're collecting, the output, right, all of those things. But if the teachers in the classrooms, if the HR decision makers at the company, if the people running training that build these curriculums, if they aren't going to have a follow-up to that experience, literally doesn't matter. Like, I actually argue with Jeremy a lot. Like, Jeremy, love everything you're doing in the lab. It's academic research. It's not the real world. So you have super compelling data that people become more empathetic when they go through this experience. Well, how are you going to build that into the cadence of how an organization trains? Because right now, no one wants to do sexual harassment training. It's click, 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 click. How fast can I get through it? Yep. So we don't want to put someone into VR, whether it's a kid at a school with anything, or whether it's sexual harassment or compliance or whatever it is, blow their mind. Wow, I never thought about it that way. And then they go on with their life. And then they do it again next year because they have to. So how do we reinforce it, and how do we make it so this is a tool in the tool belt of an organization, a school, et cetera, where you're changing the culture of how they train people and how they prepare people and how they educate them, to where it isn't just, that was cool, or that was cool, and then they move on.
Right.
Like, that is super critical. So if Unity can help us figure that out, if Microsoft, if Oculus, like, that is, I'm going to change my answer. Price and stuff, that's like number 1B. 1A is the change of the culture of how all this stuff is implemented that's holding it back.
So we could clearly talk about this for quite some time.
Yeah.
1 minute left, 15, 20 seconds on what you want to leave the audience with.
Please partner with us.
Boom.
You can't, that's not
Sorry,
fair. All right. No, I would say I really think this is a phenomenally powerful tool for education and training, really unlike anything that's been there before. And I think there's tremendous value. Like, I think the future is incredibly powerful for it, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of people being involved. And I just hope as many people in this room and outside as possible come on that journey with us.
If you're a Fortune 500 company you probably do multiple billions of dollars a year in revenue, and you're probably nickel and diming to see how cheap you can make a POC to test VR, and you're going to lose. So don't do that, and talk to us to do it the right way.
I think it's a great equalizer if we use it the right way, and it can transform the way we learn and make it really relevant to how we're experiencing the real world and make our learnings connected to what we're doing in the real world.
Terrific. Well, help me thank this panel.